Hello. Our story begins frozen in time on Toydaria. A sage Ventress, just ordered to kill the king of the Toydarians, was flung backwards, her sabers still ignited in her hands, until they were pulled into Yoda's. The little green Grandmaster stood quietly, looking over the weapons before tossing them back towards her, expressing that she had much to learn. Yoda's attention turned towards the hologram of his former apprentice. He told Dooku that this was over. There would be no more threatening the lives of innocents who did not want a part of his war. As Yoda said that, Asajj ignited her sabers once more. As she stepped to the side, from the solar sailor behind her, Dooku emerged. He was aware that Yoda would be coming here, and he planned to show up for his former master in a contest of the blade. They didn't have a chance to finish their previous exchange on Geonosis. Yoda told the troopers to get the king out of here, but as they ran to guide him away, all three were stopped in their tracks. Yoda ignited his saber, preparing to stop Ventress from choking these men. But as he readied himself to strike at her, Dooku's crimson saber ignited and he lunged in, crossing blades with his former teacher and shoving him backwards. Their blades clashed as Asajj stepped forward, gently shoving her saber through Thyre, Jack, and Louise's chests, dropping each of them. She stood with pride, before reaching her hand out and choking the king and his guard as her master dueled with the Grandmaster. It had been a long and arduous journey to find the king of Toydaria, but Yoda was ready to defeat this count. He leapt backwards as Dooku continued to press his assault. He wanted to make sure Yoda died with disappointment in his heart. Yoda leapt up using all the same strategy he used on Geonosis, not more than a few months before. Dooku was eager for this moment. He blasted down on Yoda's blade, just as he had Yaddle's years before. The two of them crossed across the landscape as Ventress shadowed the two opponents. She was given instructions not to interfere. She planned on listening. Dooku lunged forward, slipping a strike made by his master as he twisted back and jabbed down. Their blades connected and Yoda jumped, using his evasive form to avoid smashing his blade against Dooku's. He knew that his energy was slowly creeping out of him, and he needed to defeat his former apprentice in some way, shape, or form. Yoda landed heavily and Dooku stopped himself from attacking, taking a moment to enjoy this. He watched Yoda scan the bodies of the dead clones, king, and guards. All their lives had value, and none of them deserved to be killed, especially not in the way that they were. Yoda looked to his former student who stood with pride. Asajj had done well, and Yoda couldn't do anything about it. They locked blades again, slamming them against each other as they tried to determine a victor. The Grandmaster knew Dooku was lost, and he didn't want to admit it to himself, but now he needed to figure a way out of this to survive. Yoda leapt over strikes and defended others as the student pressed him backwards. Dooku was going as aggressively as he could, but he made it appear as if he was just warming up, not going full speed. Dooku spun back, slipping his cape off of his shoulders and slashing down, and jabbing forward. The combo knocked Yoda off balance as he used the Force to stop the jab from killing him. The two didn't have anything to say when they started, but now, Tyrannus felt like he could get a word of substance in. He told his former instructor that he had given his life to the wrong path. If only he could see the value in the dark side, the value in destroying the corrupt system. Yoda used his strength to shove Dooku backwards, knocking his blade from his hand, and for perhaps the first time in centuries, Yoda used all of his hidden fury to rip his saber into his own hand as he lunged at Dooku, who was nearly defenseless. Asajj landed in front of Yoda, blocking the strike and taking the brunt of the hit, which gave Dooku time to squeeze around her and slash Yoda across the cheek before electrocuting him as he fell backwards. Yoda tumbled across the ground and wheezed heavily. Tyrannus wasn't finished yet, as he walked closer and continued to unload electricity all over his former teacher. Yoda coughed heavily, telling Dooku that he would never win. Another Jedi would come along and show him the true meaning of the light. Dooku shot more electricity down at the Grandmaster. He didn't want to hear any more of these lectures. The Jedi Council spent more time waxing poetic about their code and morals than they did saving the people who could use them. Yoda wheezed and coughed heavily again, crawling away from Dooku. It was almost poetic. A journey that started with Yaddle found completion with Yoda. However, there was a point that Dooku thought was pretty clever. Yoda said another Jedi would come along. He turned to Asajj and told her to fetch something for him. He would make sure another Jedi did come along. A hideous smile rolled across his face as he said that. Inside the Jedi Temple, Master Windu was called down by Master Imogen D in the communication room. It was urgent. so Mace sped through the halls, rushing between groups of younglings and eventually finding himself in the room. When he walked in, he saw Mullet 1 Kenobi and Anakin standing with a couple other Jedi Masters. Mace asked what it was, and Master Gundy pointed towards a screen as a hollow message from Toydaria replayed. Master Yoda looked and spoke with a coarse voice. He told whoever was listening that he had failed. Dooku bested him in combat, and he had simply failed. He expressed shame in his failure, but he wanted them to know that a new Jedi would rise. Yoda believed that it was time for the new generation to move forward, and it should be led by the Chosen One. His last few words were, "Turn young Skywalker into the Grandmaster." As the last word left his mouth, his head rolled off of his body. Ima Gundy turned to the Master of the Order, the highest-ranked individual within the entire temple, and asked him what they were going to do now. He looked to the room and expressed that they would evolve. Mace pointed towards Kenobi and Skywalker, requesting that they come with him, as he excused himself from the room. Mace's heart hurt. His best friend was just executed in front of him. Yoda wasn't just a mentor to most Jedi, but an ally and a friend who had trained everyone on the council, including the likes of Mace Windu. This death hurt even more because it was his former friend who killed Yoda. Master Windu already felt an immense burden for not having killed Dooku on Geonosis, and in his inaction, Yoda was killed. Another painful reminder of his failure to act when he had the moment to kill his former friend. All mistakes needed to be corrected. Mace needed to consult the council on what they had just seen. It was very common for Jedi of the High Council to make final requests, especially if they believed someone was ready. The most recent example of this was the dying Master Tyvoka, who used his voice to get Plo into the council. However, this was different, and the entire council, regardless of their opinion on the matter, agreed upon that. Typically, capable masters were recommended for these positions because a dying master was typically late in their life, dying naturally, and they wanted their student to succeed them. The Jedi Council had little time to react, and they needed to make a decision and find their leader. The greatest talking point for Skywalker was the fact that they could give him a chance. No one knew how well he'd handle the responsibility, not even Obi-Wan, but they didn't want to subjugate the Order to any sense of recklessness. While the role of Grandmaster wasn't traditionally synonymous with tyranny and dictatorship, it was the leader of the Order. The Council did have a say in following the will of the Grandmaster's decisions, so this could be something that didn't destroy the Jedi. It was hard for many Jedi to just accept that Yoda would appoint Skywalker to the future of the Order at this current moment. When he was 30 or 40, that'd be a different story. But he was still 19, so they were going to just make him the youngest Grandmaster in their recorded history in the midst of a galactic divide? Mace looked to his fellow counselors and said that while he didn't personally agree with the decision Yoda put before them, he did agree that the Force worked in mysterious ways. Perhaps it was in their best intention to allow it to work as such, and have faith in Skywalker. Trust was hard to come by, especially within the council chambers, but faith was the first step forward. They would never turn the page if they didn't have faith, and despite his own skepticism, they were here around him for a reason. They wouldn't just forfeit control over the council or the Order over to Anakin. This was one collective body of strength. The counselors, on edge about the decision, casted their votes in Anakin's favor. Very few believed Anakin was ready, including Obi-Wan. But Mace's talk about faith and support was a reasonable idea. It projected that the council was more than a political body, but one willing to support the changing times. The Jedi were going to look at this favorably and try to make the best of a situation that demanded the best version of each individual within these chambers. Anakin would be invited in, where they would commence the mastering ceremony, something that hadn't been done in nearly 2 centuries. There was a period where Yoda temporarily stepped down for a decade or so in the High Republic, so Yoda was the last Jedi Master to receive the ceremony. It was tradition for tradition's sake. The Council welcomed Anakin in with open arms, and it all began relatively smoothly. Anakin was guided through the reins of being on the Council. It was actually fairly simple to understand. He was the political leader of the Order, and therefore the voice of the Council and of the Order. While Master of the Order held the role of leader of the Council, Skywalker's new role was traditionally associated with great wisdom and mastery, neither of which Anakin possessed at this current moment. Anakin sat in most council sessions following his rapid appointment in absolute confusion. There was a lot more that went on than he initially realized. However, he believed that this deliberation was ruining their chance to make actions. It of course was no help that Palpatine now needed to figure out how to turn Grandmaster Skywalker against the Jedi Order he now served. So how could he do that? It was simple: turn the Council against their leader. If he could manage to force Anakin out of their ranks, it was very possible that Anakin would blame the Jedi leadership for his loss of the role of Grandmaster, instead of seeing how it started with Palpatine. The only issue is, the first few sessions on Coruscant with the Council and Palpatine were all guided strictly. The Jedi within the ranks of the Council were looking after Anakin, and they didn't let him stray too far from the path. It was set this way so that the Jedi Order wouldn't be skewed off in any different direction, because they didn't want the literal spokesperson of the Order to say something insane off the books. Anakin really didn't feel too comfortable as Grandmaster either. It was like an incurable itch, because he kept trying to get cozy and it just wasn't working for him. The political talks did his head in, and he rarely could keep up with some of the discussions. This wasn't to say that Anakin wasn't intelligent, it was to say that he was inexperienced. It's why the wisest were elected to the role of Grandmaster. The Council itself wasn't trying to punish him or make him feel excluded in any way. They just had a job to do, and he needed to keep up. On the brighter side, though, Anakin was able to return to the battlefront. During all of this, he tried his best to remain focused on Ahsoka's training, but it was a nightmare. Luckily for him, she was very self-sufficient, so she could handle herself without his direct oversight. Ahsoka was worried for Anakin though. When they finally saw each other, he was exhausted, and his energy had slipped away from him. He was eager and determined, but his body wasn't able to keep up with what he was trying to do. He was simply asking too much of his physical self. Skywalker wasn't just playing the game inside the council chambers or the executive offices inside the Senate. He was also rolling through the archives, open and restricted, to make sure he wasn't failing. He didn't want to be seen as a failure, and to him, it made the most sense to use his access to the archives to do that. So when he wasn't training Ahsoka, he was looking through holocrons. The other members of the council did remain skeptical in their trust of him, but there were members ready to commend him for offering his entire body, soul, and mind to the will of the Jedi Order. It wasn't like they didn't see him working hard. However, this faith in him would be changed rapidly in the coming weeks. Skywalker understood from his historical readings that the Jedi Grandmaster was a political and spiritual leader, but in an era of darkness, such as the Dark Ages or even Great Wars with the Sith millennia ago, a Grandmaster also became synonymous with a military leader. Chances are Yoda hadn't taken up that mantle because he didn't want to be seen as a warmonger, despite how the public tried to skew the imagery of the Jedi Order. Anakin wasn't the most loyal Jedi to the Code, but he did believe in the Order, and he didn't like the perception the Jedi were getting publicly. As a side to this, Palpatine had to play this very delicately. Anakin needed to be promoted as the poster boy of the Republic, not of the Jedi. Luckily, most of the Republic propaganda released with Anakin as the face of the war effort had been done before he ascended to the role of Grandmaster. Palpatine tried to make everything as quiet about Anakin's ascension as possible, which tragically for Anakin meant he interpreted it as the Council going behind his back to keep things on the down low. Palpatine had a plan to make sure Anakin was viewed as a Republic hero, not a Jedi hero. Skywalker started to see the writing on the wall for what he needed to be for the Jedi Order. They needed and deserved to be viewed with a lens of positivity. Anakin was going to make a public statement about the duty of the Jedi Order, one that he didn't run by the Council first. It was his first true misstep, because the public didn't know he was the Grandmaster, and no one aside from the Jedi and a few senators knew that Yoda had died. Anakin, when he returned from the Blue Shadow virus outbreak on Naboo, announced to the Republic that the position of the Jedi Order was to stand in solidarity with the people of the galaxy. As he had seen, the Order had done that, but there was still more that could be done. He was willing to lead this Order, and even the Republic, into criminal territory, to assist with stopping the rise of the crime families, and ensure that slaves, indentured servants, and citizens crushed under the rule of subjugation were freed. The Republic was everyone's system, and the Jedi were everyone's protectors. He ended his statement with an awkward "for light and life." The council was shocked because no one knew this was coming, and he had misread the room based on a couple of conversations with Palpatine and with the council. While the speech was actually really pretty well crafted and spoke to some people of the mid-rim, the core, on the other hand, was furious, and the tabloids had a field day with it. Some various titles that came out of it were Yoda Dead, Child Grandmaster, another read Jedi Without Purpose, Try to Sound Relatable, even a tabloid released with a title of Anakin Skywalker, Power to His Head. All of this went to say that it was a PR nightmare for the Jedi, and despite Anakin's heart being in the right place, it wasn't the right thing to do. Anakin was trying to merge different eras of the Order without realizing that what the Order needed was a focused view on the now. Because of what Anakin said though, the Jedi needed to follow it. There was so much wrong with how he approached the entire thing, and it was very simply a reading the room type of issue. At the current moment, it seemed like Anakin failed upwards. He made a mistake, but it wasn't necessarily the worst thing ever. It was bold, sure, uncalled for, yeah, but in a weird way exactly what the Jedi needed. Many people had forgotten what the Jedi meant to them, and Operencesis was a staunch defender of Anakin's decision because of this. He saw that young Skywalker was reading up on his history. Was he out of place in a way? Absolutely, but he was in the right frame of mind. He was caring about the people of the galaxy, and he was thinking about people who had been forgotten by the Jedi and the Republic. This didn't mean how he handled it was correct, and Oppo agreed, but it was a step in the right direction. As Oppo phrased it, failing upwards. This little escapade about the Outer Rim didn't have a happy ending though. Grandmaster Skywalker would dive in the hut space with a Jedi task force of 150 knights and masters, and they would get walloped. The clones were a great aid, but the Jedi were crushed. The Republic effort got deep into territory, but it didn't secure anything and it ended up getting forced out. It was a terrible mess. This wasn't because of Anakin per se, but because of his message about striking the crime lords they prepared. A treaty was made between the fledgling powers, and they defended themselves. This brought tension to the hyperspace lanes that Jabba was allowing the Republic to use, but he continued to allow them to maintain their usage of these routes. All Anakin remembered about the battle for Hutt space was the hope on the people's faces when they stormed the first few planets, and the absolute desperation and despair on the faces of the Jedi when they lost. 150 Jedi went into Hutt space, only 23 returned. Anakin remembered apologizing to each of them as they limped away from combat. He promised them, and himself, that he wouldn't ever do this again. The strike in the Hutt space would come at the perfect time. With the Clone War turning from a decisive rout into a potential real war, the Jedi loss was not a top priority. It eventually would be revealed by the tabloids as the great failure of the incapable Order, but for now, the Republic force limped back into friendly territory, because the war was shifting. This was a failure seen by the Republic as a Jedi-led operation, and thus a mission that failed due to the Jedi. When Anakin returned to Coruscant, he was on the hot seat. It was his op, and it was also his failure. Many on the council were disappointed with how this had gone, especially because many didn't agree with it to begin with. This never would have happened if he didn't go out talking about the Republic strike that was coming for the crime lords. It was a bad look. It was the reason why over 100 brothers and sisters have been killed, and it was a show of the Grandmaster's failure to read the room. When Anakin returned to the council chambers to face them, he believed he was going to be removed from power, and based on many reactions around the room, it was the feeling felt. The Jedi looked terribly now. They didn't inform the public about Yoda, they put into his place a child, that child spouted off strategy, and they got crushed in Hutt space. This was, of course, the public perception of the event. Anakin stood in the chambers and looked from side to side, as he apologized for his actions, speaking expressively that it was his failure to understand. He knew that Operencesis was not coddling him by showing him his support, but this failure was no one's other than his own, and he would take the burden of that. Skywalker looked to his peers and told each of them that he would be understanding if they wanted to remove him from the ranks of the High Council and return him to the rank of Knight. He expressed sincerely that the burden on his heart was one that would never leave him, and just to think about having costed his brothers and sisters their lives brought sickness to him. The Jedi sat in silence as Master of the Order spoke up. He said that Anakin's actions had been flawed. The greatest of them was his attempt to move into Hutt territory after loudly proclaiming that he would. However, being that Yoda had faith in him, and their own faith had been shaken, the Council elected to see what Anakin planned on doing in the aftermath of what was at this point his greatest defeat. Anakin told them that he did have a plan, actually, and he did have some ideas that he would like to bring to the Council and Order so that he could rectify his collapse in Hutt space. Mace gestured forward and Anakin started. He expressed that he was grateful for the opportunity to right his wrongs, and he would like to start by reintroducing the concept of multiple Grandmasters. The pressure he felt was now immeasurable, but perhaps that was the flaw of Yoda's late tenure. Not an insult, obviously, but there were 10,000 Jedi and a politically divided galaxy that the Order was trying to navigate. A return to a period that was golden for a reason seemed like the right move. However, Anakin had learned from what others had said to him. He couldn't just retreat to some former version of the Order and hope it would work in the present. That's why the Outer Rim Crusade failed. He tried to do something that was seen in the Dark Ages or the Old Republic. The times had changed, and the Jedi needed to evolve with it. So he expressed that there would be a 4-way leadership system, 3 Grandmasters and 1 Master of the Order. It seemed like the best way to ensure the Jedi were split up evenly. Anakin called it the Jedi Tetrarchy, and believed it would be the best way to oppose the war and the Outer Rim. He did believe the Battle Masters should have more input on battle decisions, including a large sum of Jedi, and he expressed that he would like to nominate some members to the certain positions, and they allowed him to nominate. Anakin proposed that Mace Windu and even Peel become the 2 other Grand Masters, and to replace Mace's role of Master of the Order would be Plo Koon. The Jedi around the room looked to each other and thought, considering these options as Anakin bowed to sit down. Their faith had been shaken, but this move had encouraged their trust in him. He and the Council would put everything to a vote, and it would go just as proposed. The 3 Grandmasters included Peel, Windu, and Skywalker, with Plo taking up the mantle of Master of the Order. It was a very simple switch, but it allowed the Council to allocate responsibilities to the multitude of spiritual leaders. Oppa Rensesis was the most proud of Skywalker, because this was Anakin taking his own advice to learn from the past, to celebrate it but not to repeat it. Things could be done differently, and Anakin had just given the Council and the Order that chance. Sidious, on the other hand, continued to be confused why Yoda would ever promote Anakin to such a level, and why the Jedi Council continued to rally around him despite his growing number of failures. Sidious failed to grasp that it was his own student who had betrayed him. Tyrannus continued to enjoy this little game and what it meant for his own longevity with Palpatine and for the coming regime. Despite the terrible loss of life for Jedi in the Outer Rim, it truly did not affect the war. Sidious planned everything so deliberately. The only thing he could not plan for was the one person he could no longer control. Grandmaster Skywalker, though, was one of 3. As the Tetrarchy started to establish their control over the subsections of the Jedi Order, the war continued to change. Even Peel was the overseer of younglings, Padawans, and instructions for both. Mace Windu held a firm grip over the Masters and Knights of the Jedi Order, while Anakin was tasked with transforming himself into the true spiritual leader of the Order. Due to the fact that Plo, as Master of the Order, was the overseer of the Jedi Council, it was Anakin's directive to find himself, so that he could truly be what Yoda had foreseen. Anakin was also, because he was Grand Master, able to operate within the subsections protected and watched over by Peel, Windu, and Plo. Instead of Admiral Yularen's command ship, Anakin and Ahsoka were sitting down. They had just finished another training session. They sat down next to each other and Ahsoka asked if he was doing alright. The 2 of them had a very strong bond with one another, and it was thriving currently, thanks to Anakin's ability to balance his council life, general life, and instructor life. At first, it was hard, and Ahsoka had to train frequently with Rex or another Jedi, but now they were tighter and acting like a true master and apprentice duo. Anakin told her that he was alright. He did confess, though, that when he first started, he believed what he was doing would have been easier. When he was first put into the role of Grand Master, he had a sense of fulfillment, believing that he could right the wrongs of the Order, but he didn't realize how much needed to be done in order to actually be a successful Grand Master. Ever since his failure in the Outer Rim, he had been as hard on himself as he had ever been, but it felt right. He told Ahsoka that there was a powerful lesson in all of this, one that she should take from it actually. She smiled and asked what it was, as he told her to not believe she knows everything when she gets started. He nudged her in a joking way, which she realized he was taking a shot at her for her initial know-it-all phase. She laughed and asked what the real advice was, and he got up telling her he didn't actually have any. He laughed, walking away, as she called him some spiritual leader. They of course were just joking with each other, but he turned back and told her that failure was the greatest teacher. More than that though, he learned that it was those who are around you who uplifted you. Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Rex, the clones, Yularen were all great for various reasons, but the Council had the choice to drop him, and they chose to uplift him. So while he admitted that those around him were all great, it was the combined determination of the Council, full of elders and the wisest minds of the Order, that pulled him together. Anakin hadn't ever felt so compelled to be the best version of himself. It wasn't that it didn't exist within him, they just made it easier. The Council saw who he could be. At least from Anakin's perspective, they did. And because of that, he could grow beyond what he initially believed was possible for himself. He told Ahsoka that he would always be here for her, but he also told her to never be afraid to surround herself with others that might challenge her in ways that she might be nervous to conquer. This was her one life. Anakin smiled reassuringly. She should live it to the best of her abilities. The two of them walked out of the training room together, master and apprentice, stronger than ever before. The war itself continued to evolve around them. With the Phase 2 clone armor being rolled out, the beginning of the end of the conflict was upon them. Anakin had his encounters with Dooku several times throughout this war, but what became apparent to Tyrannus and Sidious was the fact that instead of delving deeper into darkness, Anakin was firming himself in the light. Obi-Wan's little Rhaegar Hardeen trip wouldn't upset Anakin because he was well aware of it due to being Grandmaster. The secrets of the Order and the Council were in the palm of his hand, and while it initially was a great challenge, Anakin thrived off of it. He found himself burning with desire to grow. His love of the Jedi way and those around him only made him even more passionate as a Jedi. Despite the road having been bumpy to get here, it was Skywalker who steadied himself to the place he was now. Thanks to the way the Council operated after Anakin's Outer Rim failure, he was able to focus on his lessons in spirituality. But that wasn't the only thing. His input in Outer Rim battles started to shake things up positively. Ever since the beginning of the Jedi Tetrarchy, there were movements inside the Outer Rim. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka were a part of one at Zygerria. It was for a different reason, but instead of large task forces of hundreds of Jedi, Grandmaster Windu sent out droves of Jedi in small groups of 5 or 6 members to cause disruptions amongst the crime lords. They ended up creating a war between the Black Suns and the Pikes by doing this, which wasn't something the Jedi could take credit for, but it was their responsibility. Though the Council did have to mourn the loss of one of its members, as Even Peel died at the Citadel during a rescue operation. It would be a terrible day for everyone in the Order. He'd be buried away from the temple, but his kyber crystal would find his home inside the Jedi Temple. Even's successor would be Jedi Master Shaak Ti, who would slip right into the role of overseer for younglings, Padawans, and their instruction very easily. She was able to maintain a firm grip over this role, even by being present at Kamino frequently. Skywalker, on the other hand, was using the wisdom he was filling his mind with to try and figure out the best approach to defeating the Sith. In a manner similar to their strike at the Outer Rim, he believed the Council specifically should be searching for the location of the Sith. Without knowing it, the Jedi's interference in the war didn't change a thing. But the Jedi were winning while sending out hundreds of members into the Outer Rim to complete Grandmaster Skywalker's initiative. It may have not been tabloid news anymore, but it was a huge deal for the people in the Outer Rim. They finally got their protection, and their appreciation for the Jedi couldn't be overstated. It was a word-of-mouth celebration of the Jedi's work. Anakin believed, though, that to defeat the Sith, it would take the entire Council doing something that the Sith couldn't foresee. Yoda often spoke about the dark side clouding everything, so why not find their way through the cloud of the dark side? The Night Sisters could be a great aid to them. Some of the Council were skeptical, but there was a growing belief that the Sith were planning to take control over the Republic. Anakin was against the concept of Palpatine being that individual, and the Council had decreased its slander of Palpatine with Skywalker as one of their members, but there was skepticism around Sheev's loyalty to the Republic and democracy. If the Jedi, though, chose to use darkness to defeat their enemies, then they could be undoing years of peace. Anakin disregarded this, referring to a period before the Old Republic. There were countless subsections of the Jedi during a Sith hiatus. The Jedi during this time were hidden or something, but one of these subgroups of Jedi became alarmingly hostile towards the local inhabitants of a mid-rim world. He thought it was Malastare, but he couldn't remember. These Jedi clouded themselves with darkness, and used it to hide within the mist of the caves of Malastare. The Jedi, the real ones, used a dark ritual used by the locals to call upon darkness to reveal the enemy and destroy them before they could send the people of Malastare into extinction through their own dark rituals. This could perhaps be their answer to defeating the Sith. Being that Anakin was fully embracing the mantle of spiritual leader, the Council believed that this actually was the right decision for the Jedi Order. If they could use darkness to find the Sith Lord, then perhaps they could finish things off the way they needed to. As they prepared to leave for Dathomir, Master Skywalker requested that Plo send out Jedi scouts from their base of operations at Obadiah to the planet Mustafar. He asked why, and Anakin shook his head. He reminded the Master of the Order of the Children of the Force who were captured by the Sith earlier in the war. Perhaps the Sith Lord returned to Mustafar. From his readings, it seemed as if Sith had a history of claiming worlds and returning, even after the Jedi cleared them out. That'd be a good place to start. Plo obliged, especially because the Black Suns were crushing the Pike Syndicate, and their final stand at Obadiah was just days away. It'd be best for the Jedi to pull out before they were caught in the crossfire. On the way to Dathomir, Anakin, Mace Windu, and Shakti had a discussion. Mace asked Anakin how he became so entranced by the lessons of the past, and the answer was quite surprising. Anakin expressed that the formation of academia within the halls of the temple weren't fitting to his learning style. He rejected a lot of his early teachings because he couldn't take tests. The information wasn't hard for him to retain, but he couldn't do test taking. Maybe it was anxiety or not having any real grasp of how doing tests worked, but in his spiritual studies as Grandmaster, he found that he actually enjoyed learning quite a lot. He always loved using the saber and training, but he could listen to hollow recordings while he trained. He often listened and meditated at the same time. Overall, Anakin expressed that these lessons were comforting. It was nice to know that he wasn't a total failure of a Jedi, and that there were many lessons of the Order that had been forgotten. It made him excited to think about the potential of bringing some of these things to the current Order. Mace and Shakti expressed pride in Anakin's ability to take this role with sincerity. It was a true difference maker in their eyes. When they arrived on Dathomir, they were greeted with some hostility. They were believed to be separatists, but they were not. Mother Talzin wasn't exactly fond of the Jedi, but their neutral standpoint here brought her a sense of curiosity. What could the Jedi be here for? And when they revealed what they wanted, she chuckled to herself. The mighty, righteous Jedi Order, attempting to use the dark side to right the wrongs of their past. How fascinating. She was willing to cooperate. However, she wanted absolute certainty that the Order would never cross paths with her aggression. She wanted the Jedi to recognize the Night Sisters for who they were, not what the Jedi wished they would be. Mace and Shakti looked to each other as Anakin quickly responded, breaking through the silence and telling the Great Mother that he promised with his life that he would ensure the Night Sisters were treated fairly, no matter what. She smiled and suggested that they begin their ritual. Through an hour or so of meditation and magic, she revealed that someone close to one of them was indeed the Sith Lord. The Jedi were all confused. How could this be? However, there was still something else. While she wanted to investigate this, there was the notion that Anakin's position wasn't what they thought it was. She delved deeper, revealing that Windu's former friend, Master Dooku, had lied to the Jedi and to his master. The Sith Lord, Sidious, did not know the truth, and neither did they. When Grandmaster Yoda was killed on Todaria, he had sent a different message. The Jedi had received a message about Anakin becoming Grandmaster, but it was altered by Dooku. It was in an attempt to drive a wedge further within the Order itself, and force his master Sidious to choose himself over Skywalker. She turned to Anakin and told him that Yoda never mentioned him in his dying breath. What he did do was mention that a rising light would come. A Jedi would rise within their ranks to inspire a generation. Both messages ended kind of the same, because Dooku had altered the conversation, but Talzin expressed shame for this revelation, sensing Anakin's almost heartbreak over it. He feared that the Council would forego his role when they returned. To him, it wasn't about power. It was the newfound community that he had with his brethren. but Shaak Ti placed her hand on his shoulder, comforting him without saying a word. Talzin then wanted to begin their next leg of the discussions, which was the secrets of who the Sith Lord was. She informed Anakin that to find this, she would need to access all of his memories, and they would display all of them in front of everyone. Anakin looked at Talzin and then realized what this meant, but before he could question if it was worth it or not, he went forward anyways. The three Jedi would see a lot, including several memories with Padme, which would be discussed later. But more importantly, Talzin and the Jedi learned that one of the closest to Anakin as a mentor outside of the Order was the Dark Lord of the Sith. Sidious was currently inside of the works on Coruscant, planning, deceiving. The Jedi thanked her for her knowledge, and she told them to be swift. Sidious did not let grudges go. As the Jedi walked out of the cave, they sent a long-range communication to the temple, telling them to act fast. They couldn't strike at Sidious if he was inside of the executive or senate buildings. The Jedi all agreed. A strike force was prepared and they left. As Windu and T prepared to ask Anakin about his little situation with Padme, the sound of blaster fire could be heard. The CIS was here. Skywalker looked to the other Grandmasters and told them that they made a promise to Talzin. They should stay behind and fight. Both Grandmasters agreed. The Council force on Coruscant would be able to stop Palpatine. All three of them had full belief in their capabilities. As the three Jedi of Dathomir prepared to move for combat, the temple was locked down. Master Plo assembled Eth Koth, Kit Fisto, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Depa Billaba, and Opa Rancisis for this attack. They would defeat Sidious and bring an end to this war. Sindralik was informed and the Temple Guard unit was activated, as he dispatched 10 of his best fighters with the Council unit to assist them with taking down the Sith Lord. On Sereno, Dooku wheezed in pain as old Daka and Mother Talzin used their magic to poison his skin. He cried out for Grievous to kill those Inferno witches. The droid general followed his orders. The fire in the forests of Dathomir led to the witches dying by the dozens, but the Jedi were present to help, and with Asajj preparing a fighting retreat, the Jedi showed themselves by moving through the droids as a united force. The Jedi task force of 3 was unstoppable. They worked as a team and defended each other as they approached Grievous. Asajj was so confused, but she rallied her sisters as the undead horde continued to grow around them. The Jedi slipped through the droid lines, targeting Grievous and crushing through his Magna Guard unit. Just as he swept in to attack them, Shaak Ti defended a strike, as Skywalker, who was standing on the shoulders of a B-2, leapt off of it and swung downwards, forcing Grievous to defend himself. Windu used the Force to launch a shockwave through the ground, but Grievous locked his claws into the dirt, as dozens of battle droids behind him were launched through the air. As the Jedi surrounded Grievous and started their assault, the Night Sisters rose up and forced a hold on the Separatist push. Dooku was getting closer to being killed as Talzin and Daka did everything they could within their power to make his death as painful and excruciating as possible. The Jedi on Coruscant landed at the works, quickly establishing a perimeter with the temple guards, as Palpatine, preparing to leave his lair, was jumped by the High Council. Plo and Depa struck him first, not even giving him a chance to surrender, finding him too dangerous to be left alive. Sidious ducked out of the way, slinging his sabers into his hands as he blocked Oppo and Fisto, as he then jabbed at Kenobi. Eth came in from behind Obi-Wan, swinging over his head and getting launched by Sidious. The Sith Lord leapt over a strike made by Depa, before flinging electricity into her saber, and defending a strike by Plo. He may have been outnumbered, but he moved with precision. Fisto lunged in, and he was blocked backwards as Sidious parried Kenobi, spinning him around and going for the kill, as Depa swept in, striking up and pushing down. The temple guards had their stabs ready, and they blocked off every escape, securing the escape vessels and the exits. Palpatine ducked under Plo's next strike, blocking Eth before throwing the Force at Fisto, who defended himself. Sidious was quick and remarkable, but as he turned back, he blocked a strike from Kenobi and Plo at the same time, as Oppo quickly wrapped his tail around Sidious's leg and twisted, forcing the entire calf to do a 180, forcing the bones, muscles, and tendons to all face the opposite direction. Sidious used this as strength, calling upon the darkness as he limped back after getting Plo off of him. The Jedi Masters continued to swarm Sidious, using their collective skill to destroy him. As Sidious fought, he harnessed all of his strength, creating a shockwave that forced the Jedi from their feet. Sidious ran for escape, as one of the temple guards got in the way, blasting his pike upwards, catching Sidious in the other leg, forcing him to drop. Palpatine swung backwards, cutting open the mask of Violum, the Pa'un temple guard that would have become his Grand Inquisitor. Sidious jabbed at him, but he steadily defended himself, as Plo lunged in, using the Force to plant Sidious into the ground, as Depa plunged her saber into his chest, killing him instantly. Back on Dathomir, Anakin ducked a strike from Grievous as he slipped back to cut off one of his arms. Mace and Shaak Ti used the Force to pull all of Grievous's armor plating to the side, giving Anakin a chance to swing down, killing the droid general almost instantly. Their battle wasn't finished though. With the CAS forces continuing to mount up, the Jedi joined the Witches to hold off the Separatist war machine. Thanks to Windu, Ti, and Skywalker, the Dathomir and Night Sisters are able to rally at a chokehold and force the droids into it, giving Talzin and Daka a chance to kill off Tyrannus inside of his castle on Sereno. This allowed the Night Sisters and Jedi to get their final boost of reinforcements from Talzin herself, which would put an end to the Separatist attack on Dathomir. It would be true victory all around, and while the day wasn't finished yet, the Clone Wars would see the beginning of their own end. The Jedi unit from Obadiah would find the Separatist facilities on Mustafar, and use them to capture the Separatist Council, leaving the government without true control over their army, forcing them to call for a shutdown, as to not have the droids be turned against them by some rancid Techno-Union member or whatnot. This would eventually lead to a surrender, but more importantly, instead of a Jedi T6 shuttle that was currently leaving Dathomir, the three Grandmasters were having another discussion. Mace and Shaak Ti had seen that Anakin was harboring attachments. They saw all of his memories with Padme. This, of course, went along with the fact that Anakin was not actually asked to be a member of the High Council, or even become Grand Master by Yoda. It was a fraudulent attempt to destroy the Order by Dooku. Anakin assumed that they would revoke his status and remove him from the Order altogether. But they didn't have that in mind. Anakin had proven himself to be faithful to the Jedi despite his attachments, and even more than that, he showed the Jedi Council and Order that he was an individual that could and should be trusted. Regardless of Dooku's influence on their decision to make him a Grand Master, he stood up to the challenge and took it head-on, all the while holding a marriage behind their backs. This wasn't a tribunal, it was a conversation, and Masters Ti and Windu made that abundantly clear. Anakin was a good Jedi, and he had brought out the best in the Order by merging old ideas with the new era. It was something Yoda may have not done due to complacency, and thanks to that, he had shown himself to be more than capable as a Jedi, regardless of his attachments. Mace told Anakin that they were proud of him. Skywalker was visibly upset. Why were they proud? He had lied to them, and they had all been lied to by Dooku. He never belonged with them in their council. Mace shook this off, as did Shaak Ti. Anakin proved it with Mother Talzin. She told him that he would reveal aspects of his life if they wanted to find the Sith, and Anakin proved that he was more than capable of being a Jedi because he knew what they would see, and he chose the Jedi, the galaxy, and the Republic over his own interests in both the Order and his own love life. While neither one of them could support it personally, they were willing to look past it, because perhaps as their spiritual leader, he'd be the beginning of true change for the Jedi Order. Anakin hadn't viewed it like that, but that was perhaps the gift of starting the Jedi Tetrarchy, because it couldn't have happened without his decision to create it, without the mysticism of the Force. The Clone Wars would come to an end. Anakin would see the age of the Republic mold around a stronger government in the mysterious disappearance of Palpatine. No one from the Order would ever reveal its nature. And despite Maul and Savage lurking out in the galaxy, the destruction of the Pikes and internal collapse of the Zagirians and Black Suns would lead to him attempting to use another gang of pirates with Death Watch to conquer Mandalore. That would go terribly. After the war, many first-hand accounts expressed relief and gratitude of the Jedi for their work to save them from the crime lords in the Outer Rim. The tabloids couldn't say anything to take down the Jedi, because despite their terrible PR during the war, they looked and were untouchable right now, and they would remain that way. Anakin's relationship with Padme would remain a secret between Mace and Shaak Ti, as well as eventually Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, as well as Rex and, well, okay, Anakin couldn't keep a secret to save his life, but you get it. Luke and Leia would be born and would be given a chance to become Jedi in the future, to be trained like their father. But before they were brought into this galaxy, a couple years later albeit, the Jedi saw much internal and external change. With the Sith facing true extinction and Maul and Savage's capture, they started to begin their own spiritual change. Instead of physical locations like outposts and temples across the galaxy, they started sending teachers, Jedi who taught others the code and instructed others on how to follow it with their own twist. Anakin believed that if the Jedi was a religious sect, then why not treat it as such? Include everyone, make people feel a part of their order, but in their own ways. They could continue being the Knights of the Republic, but they would never be everywhere all at once. This gave them a chance to incorporate their morals into the lives of those who looked up to them. It made the Jedi more interconnected within communities galaxy-wide. This Jedi expansion would prove that despite the Great Line being started with the intent to destroy the Jedi, and Palpatine's hopes for a Darth Skywalker, the Jedi ended up being true of heart, full of passion, and beginning a new era of Jedi peace and tranquility. And that, my friends, is our story. Special thanks to the patrons who saw me post this 100 times without actually releasing it. Here's to you all: Edwin Wells, Ozpin, Jack Silver, General Alexander, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lendl Asher, Schmoobs, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rose Bird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Primarch, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Lalian, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Unlink666, Famine Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fordo's Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the main three first names, Darkstain46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. Like I just said, I put this on the Patreon with my what I expect to release during the week about 100 times. I literally could not figure out how I wanted to write this, and this is it. I'm glad I waited. I'm very content with how this turned out. I hope you all enjoyed it, because I really wanted to tell a story that had Yoda not actually really seeing Anakin as a Grandmaster, almost envisioning someone else within the Order being this person, but Dooku trying to kind of screw over Palpatine and make Palpatine have to work extra hard to turn Anakin kind of worked against him. I really wanted this idea of a big reveal to come in later in the story, where Anakin learns that all of what he is just a lie, that him becoming Grandmaster was never meant to be. And that reveal, almost breaking his heart, but still him determining to make the right decision in the end. That even though he might lose out on his position, he's not going to lose out on it because he did something wrong. He's going to lose out on it because the council's corrupt, and they're not. They just needed a change. And I think adding Anakin in is something that would happen super unnaturally. I think it would be forced upon them, and I don't think they would be really willing to accept it. I really wanted to convey that Anakin failed, but he also kind of failed upwards. Is that his first failure is a big failure, but it ends up kind of going in a positive direction in the end. But overall, I hope you all enjoy the story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.